It's Monday, the 13th of February. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel, and we're getting a lot of questions about this United Airlines 777 Flight 1722 from Kahului, Maui to San Francisco back on 18 December that, according to the data here, showed a very steep descent on departure, bringing the aircraft within nearly 775 feet of the ocean. Let's check it out. Here on Simple Flying, it's reported that the incident on the Boeing 777-200 occurred shortly after takeoff. United Airlines 1722 took off from the Kahului airport at 14:49 local time, where it was met with stormy conditions. By the way, this is the same day that the severe turbulence was encountered by Hawaiian Airlines Flight 35, an Airbus A330. That turbulence encounter was up at altitude at nearly 40,000 feet. That crew at cruise altitude, getting ready to descend into Hawaii, met a cloud that was rising faster than they could get out of the way of, and they hit severe turbulence in that cloud. So that was the same day, but I'm not sure weather is the factor in this incident with United Airlines. Looking at the data provided by FlightRadar24.com, the aircraft reached 2,200 feet approximately a minute after departing. However, it quickly began descending just north of the island's Baldwin Beach Park. At 1450, the calibrated altitude of the aircraft was just about 775 feet as the aircraft dropped over the water along the coast of Maui. The 777 quickly began to gain altitude, rising to 1,050 feet at 1451, and we'll take a look at these data points. The aircraft hit 33,300 feet 7 minutes later and continued eastward, and reaching San Francisco at 21:03 local time. The Air Current online magazine has noted that the two people familiar with the event shared that the climb produced forces of nearly 2.7 times the force of gravity on the aircraft and its occupants. So when they were pulling out of that dive, as the descent shifted to a 8,600 foot per minute rate of climb. Remember, transport category aircraft are rated for 2.5 Gs. So this is going to result in an over G inspection of the aircraft if those G limits are accurate, and the aircraft does record all of this data, including the G forces imposed on the aircraft. And this is the data we're looking at on Flight Radar 24. We've got a normal takeoff and climb to 2,200 feet and 208 knots, and looking at the granular data here, I suspect that this aircraft is being hand flown at this time, and then a steady descent coupled with an increase of airspeed all the way down to 775 feet, and the airspeed spikes up to 294 knots. Correction, the ground speed spikes up to 294 knots. And then the aircraft is recovered, and the climb is resumed. When you get this close to the water in this sort of a descent, you're going to get all kinds of GPWIS or ground proximity warning system warnings from the aircraft. So why is this information just coming to light now? Well, since there was no injuries, unlike the turbulence flight, which had injuries, that got the FAA and NTSB's attention right away. This flight had no injuries, and so it goes through a system called an ASAP, or Aviation Safety Reporting System, throughout the airlines. And it's the FAA system of self-reporting incidents so that the data can be collected, information can be gleaned by the operators and the FAA, and then corrections made as required, as needed. So the FAA and NTSB don't necessarily get involved. They may review the reports. The reports are reviewed by the crews and the airlines, and the crews involved are usually phone in and give a telephone explanation as to what happened. But this is all done anonymously, and that's part of the importance of the safety program, is to keep it anonymous so that you can report safely without repercussion of something that has happened. And of course, the aircraft is reporting all this data anyways, so the data is already out there. You have to climb, conserve, confess, and tell everybody your side of the story as to what happened. But because there was no injuries here, and there is really no need for further FAA or NTSB action unless this is becoming a trend, and it may very well be. What investigators, well, what this looks like to me, since investigators are not investigating it, what this looks like to me is a situation very similar to what happened back in December of 2021 to Emirates Flight 231, covered on this channel. Remember this flight taking off out of Dubai, the flight crew had inadvertently, or the previous crew, somebody had set 0 in the altitude select window. And when the crew took off, throughout the entire pre-flight and pre-takeoff checklist, nobody noticed that 0 was set in the altimeter. And when the crew took off and engaged the altitude, or the autopilot, the aircraft did exactly what it was told to do and began to head down to 0 feet of altitude. And these guys engaged the autopilot very early in the takeoff sequence and overran the runway and just barely cleared the buildings off of the end of the runway. As typical of operations here in the States and at United Airlines and other major carriers, the pilots will typically keep the autopilot off. They'll hand fly the aircraft up to several thousand feet before engaging the autopilot. So one of the things that could easily lead to this is that same situation. If you engage the autopilot, we're right about here at 2,200 feet with 0 set in the altitude window, it'll just head right down to 0 feet of altitude. And then all the jip whiz warnings will start going off, and there will be a bit of mayhem in the cockpit pulling and recovering this aircraft out of that relatively steep dive. How it got up to that rate of descent is not clear to me at this time. If this was a autopilot automation mistake. Now, regarding is this becoming a trend? Well, here's another one right here on the 10th of January in Qatar, a Boeing 787 from Qatar Airways. Qatar flight 161 from Doha to Copenhagen departed Doha's runway 16 left in nighttime conditions at 2 in the morning and had climbed to about 1,800 feet when the aircraft entered a steep descent, losing 1,000 feet within 24 seconds. The aircraft was subsequently recovered, climbed out, and continued to Copenhagen, where the aircraft landed safely about 6 hours later. According to information the Aviation Herald received on 7 February, the first officer was the pilot flying. At about 1,600 feet, the aircraft was cleared direct to the next waypoint, and the first officer attempted to turn towards the waypoint, flying manually without the flight directors on. And this is a common complaint I hear in training departments around the country, is the ability for pilots to hand fly these large aircraft with the flight directors turned off is somewhat limited. These skills, these basic skills, are being lost as we have this huge turnover in the industry. But especially too, you're flying at night over the Black Ocean. This would be the perfect opportunity to have the autopilot on and not be practicing your hand flying skills at night in IMC conditions over the dark ocean. So they were heading towards the next waypoint manually without the flight directors. The captain was slow to put the direct input into the flight management system, and the FO lost situational awareness, sending the aircraft into a descent that reached 3,000 foot per minute sink rate, and it exceeded the flap limit speed until the captain took control of the aircraft and recovered at about 800 feet above the water. This occurrence was also not reported to the authorities until it came to light later. So this looks like a classic case of spatial disorientation saved by the other pilot. Now back to this United Airlines flight back on 18 December of last year. This incident occurred immediately after takeoff in straight and level flight right as they coasted out over the water there. And in another disturbing trend, apparently nobody at approach or tower noticed that this was going on, nor did they say anything to the pilots of the aircraft. We can't find anything on real ATC that indicates that ATC even noticed this was happening. And right about there is where they're getting their low altitude alert, just right off of the beach there. So again, very similar to that situation back in Doha. Did the crew set zero in the flight altitude window? We don't know. So overall, just a very disturbing trend of distractions and lost opportunities to capture mistakes early before they become much bigger mistakes. Thanks so much for your support of this channel, especially those that support this channel on Patreon and make this content possible. See you here.